Hello, you found Lisa talking again. I'm a little bit late with this because my scheduling was thrown out by having to redo that video about the Nubia and Egypt. But here we are for the finale in our series about what's keeping the UK stable. And today I wanted to talk about the thread that runs through all our institutions that's actually a very key source of stability for the UK, especially in a period where this thread is being jeopardised by kind of the Westminster media culture and the tabloid press culture who are causing instability all over the place. And B, because actually this is an institution that's about to go through a period of evolution, and that's the British Crown. Now, most civilizations in the world, they literally, the governance systems begin with a combination of the search for the sacred and a monarchy emerges out of. Usually it's a process whereby kind of tribal federations of some form will form, and then this kind of centralizes into some form of monarchy at some point. And this is very much the case in this country. Now, the monarchy in terms of the crown, in terms of the institution that exists now, has roots that go directly back to a process of centralization away from kind of multiple kingdoms, finally emerging from the Battle of Hastings with William the Conqueror, but actually has roots back to Edward the Confessor, who was kind of the generation before. My particular interest is a woman called Emma of Normandy, who was Edward the Confessor's mother, because she is actually the woman who straddles a period where we kind of become a kind of an entity that you would recognise as England. Now, the institution of the crown is incredibly old. So even if you are just looking at this kind of period, you are talking 1,000 years. But actually it's got roots that probably go another 1,000 years before that. The seed item to the British monarchy is actually an item called the Sutton Hoo whetstone, which you can find in the British Museum, which is the point at which we start to kind of, the power starts to shift down to kind of where it is now in the southeast, and you know, the emergence of kingship. So this is a very long institution, a very old institution. Now, learning about the actual progression of the British monarchy is actually a very useful way to get a grip on British history. Not because the only important thing in our history is kings and queens, it certainly isn't, but because through this story told about this institution with a family at the centre of it, you can get a story about how this country came into being, how it learnt to govern itself, the history of our rule of law, the history of our systems, the history of our economy. And it's generally told through a fairly easy to remember story about successive generations of a family. It's actually several different kind of strands, as it's actually, you break it up with dynasties. And this is actually a useful way to get to grips with history for pretty much most countries, in my experience. Now, this is very much a story about how we have learned to govern ourselves, because on all the institutions that we have now, they have all emerged from this central strand: our rule of law, our justice system, our civil service. Our treasury has roots going back to Henry VII's bedroom. And if you actually understand this story, you can actually get a really solid picture of the development of very mature institutions over about 1,000 years. But as a consequence, we have a family who actually still exist in this institution. Now, leaving the European Union is not that complicated for the UK, because actually we have our own financial centre and currency. But if we were to try and unpick the crown from our institutions, we would literally, I don't think we would even know where to begin. But in actual fact, the royal family that we have for quite some time now existed within this institution to ensure that the rest of the system functions as a republic and a democracy. So the Queen, when she does the opening of Parliament, she speaks the Prime Minister's words as a sign that this is what she is for. For my purposes, the duties that I was watching during austerity, I was very concerned with kind of duties and laws that had kind of developed in the last quarter of the 20th century around safeguarding, around social care. These are actually the systems and duties that our Westminster media-focused parties had decided could just be gotten rid of. But because they were secure under the Crown, I knew that that wasn't possible, and we would just generate instability by doing it. This is how solid this central strand is. Now, the crown is essential for our stability. And the reason that monarchy has been this kind of stable system of governance for so many kind of different civilizations is because it has the most stably reproducing institution of all at its center, the family. The family is how the human species reproduces. It's the unit at the center of our economic organization, our social organization. And until kind of the beginning of the 20th century in Europe, it was at the center of our political organization. Well, Thomas Piketty identifies that the family is a means by which kind of wealth kind of concentrates and that it generates instability. And the converse of this is because actually you can actually tell when elite social closure is a problem in an institution because family and dynastic succession start to appear. In the Labour Party at present, they have a problem with dynastic politics, which indicates dysfunction in wider institutions. Now, in the UK, the crown is incredibly stable because actually it's a story, when you look at it over a long time, of this institution adapting and adapting and adapting. As the country changes, this institution adapts. The 20th century saw a massive change in this institution. The age of deference was over, and this institution had to come to kind of represent new things in a society that's actually changed quite significantly. Now, in the last quarter of the 20th century, what became apparent is that the biggest change to human organizations in history was kind of done. And this is a change to the actual core family structure. And this change impacted West and East. It's actually across national borders. It happened spontaneously in the 20th century. And it's that women changed family from an institution of ownership and subordination where they were contained within it to one of reciprocity. So now the family is essential for understanding the way that institutions come together in our social policy systems. You have to understand duties to children to understand which institutions kind of join together around families at this point. This is actually a really important change that's causing problems and instability. Partially, one of the problems of our economics is they can't accommodate this because they've been using like economic modelling with a legacy breadwinner kind of carer model at the centre that hasn't existed for quite some time. This is actually generating crisis. Now, we've been through kind of many different things in these videos. We've looked at the economics that we've been using. We've looked at a crisis in our mediating class. We've looked at our international relations. But this institution and its stability is at the core of UK instability, and we're about to start going through a period where it evolves. Now, one of the first things I wanted to talk about that's impacting our current monarchy is the Westminster press and the way that they are generating constitutional crisis deliberately around Prince Harry and Meghan, and I wanted to talk about what's revealed by this. Now, in the late 90s, two changes kind of came together in an appalling way and resulted in the death of Princess Diana, who was Prince Harry's mother. Now, one was the changing family structure that had shaped the 20th century. It rocked the monarchy with a series of divorces. And while the rest of us were looking at it and we were like, we don't understand why divorce is a big problem, in a monarchy, this is a very serious problem because this is an alteration to the structure of the institution. But this coincided with another change, which was that our political press, our tabloid press, were at the height of their power. And in essence, this woman, Princess Diana, became the first kind of big media star of monarchy, and then they handed her to her death after her divorce. Prince Harry is her son. And while the rest of the country, this marks like a watershed moment in the UK's relationship with the monarchy. The toxicity of the press has since come out in a whole bunch of other ways. They have been behaving like organised criminals behind walls that nobody can touch. Since they started using the internet, they've tried to translate that to kind of their internet world with a social dimension, and they're behaving like organised criminals openly on Twitter for the world to see. But with regards to Prince Harry, he married a woman, Meghan, who was an American actress, and they've had 2 children now, I think. I don't keep up with the soap opera, so I'm sometimes a bit sketchy on the details with that stuff. And because the political press had not noticed that the context had changed around them, they literally started to do exactly the same as they had done with Princess Diana with this young man and his wife. And we are now in a position where the crown is actually healthy, you know, it's reproducing. There are successive generations of this family, kind of, they've had children, they give up their, you know, they live in this institution from birth to death, and they occupy this important role in an institution that keeps the rest of our institution actually stable. If this institution ceases to reproduce, we have major questions that we have to prepare for to stop there being instability in other institutions. Now, the vitriol that's being kind of projected through Twitter and through the political press at this young couple is indicative of a media culture who have not adapted to the world changing around them. They are incredibly focused on her race. The racist outpouring that has been kind of vented at this woman is very much seen in the difference between the way they have treated, and they didn't treat William's wife Kate that well either. They used to call her Waity Katie and mocked her for the period of their engagement. I think they were engaged for 9 years so that she didn't have to step into public life and be subject to this. And this young woman, she said, actually, I've had a baby, I'm very vulnerable, I don't have to deal with this. And this young couple, this young man had lost his mother to this, said, actually, we don't have to do this. And they are currently in the US. Now, we are in a process right now where the position of these young people is that they don't cease to be who they are because the Westminster press have made it impossible for them to be in this country. And they continue to project an image to the world about who we are as a country. And that image is actually of modernity, of a young couple who live in the actual world. I think they're actually trying media things and, they're not in line to the throne, so defining a role for themselves is important. But on the back of it, we have the Westminster media projecting to the world a racism and a misogyny that's about a world that's dead, about an age that's gone. And in doing so, they are threatening to jeopardize the stability of the monarchy and its ability to reproduce full stop. These people within the royal family, they have no power. We have to prepare for questions for the point where their next generation may not want to do it at all. And we have a press who are literally projecting out hatred that they project to other groups, to, welfare claimants, to Muslims, to anybody who's not in their culture. They are currently kind of generating security risks by exposing their dysfunction on Twitter. And much of this is now being kind of aimed at this young couple. Now, in actual fact, while I don't watch the news and I don't keep an eye on the soap opera, I saw there had recently been a report into the Martin Bashir interview with Princess Diana in her lifetime. And the response to it by the palace, I think, was a very smart way to sidestep the narcissistic spiral that's being aimed at this young couple. The men like John Major have come out and said, actually, this is a family, and have actually kind of, the country, this vitriol that's being aimed at them is not representative of the country. You often see within the articles these news editors and Twitter accounts claim that they are on the side of another rival within the royal household. I think they're trying to pit Duchess of Cambridge and Meghan against each other. Now, I don't doubt that this has caused incredible tensions and stresses within this family. I can't imagine how it would do anything but. But in actual fact, it's generating a situation where we are going to have to address our press. And in order to maintain stability in the crown, we are going to need the crown to say, we are not beholden to the press. We occupy an important constitutional role. And this is actually threatening it and threatening our family. And our children in particular cannot be subjected to this anymore. Now, we've just been through an incredibly stable period with the monarchy because Queen Elizabeth II has been on the throne since the 1950s, and she's actually probably going to step down very soon, especially given Prince Philip has just passed away. And we are about to enter into a period where Prince Charles is going to become king. Now, by and large, he's not going to be popular. He's really not. But he actually represents a very significant change. He represents a significant change because he is divorced and so is his wife. It will be our first divorced monarchs. We will have a monarch who represents the change to family structure that happened in the 20th century, and now heterogeneity of family forms is no longer contested. They show that the crown can accommodate this. But his unpopularity may actually provide a very, very important period for the monarchy, because he holds the press in disdain. And he is likely to be the monarch saying, we don't care what the press think, at a point where the country is literally top line on UK global risk reports because of this culture on Twitter, because of the press and their impact on our democracy. And he is going to be able to say, actually, we don't do that. We are not beholden to these people anymore. And in actual fact, we have the next generation after him is the Duchess and Duke of Cambridge, and they have children, and they are very much a much younger modern couple. They had lived together for a long time before they were married. She refuses to be the fashion kind of press's darling. I think she buys her dresses about a year in advance so that when she wears them, they won't cause like an actual market impact. This is a generation of monarchy who have learned, because they have been actually at the brunt of this kind of political press and tabloid press culture in a very important period in their actual lives. And we should find over a period of time that actually this kind of stabilizes and this institution reproduces. Now, I wanted to talk briefly about a woman called Queen Charlotte, and she was the wife of George III. And George III was a monarch during a period where the American Revolution was happening, the French Revolution was happening. This was a terrifying period for the monarchy. And a man called Edmund Burke is a really good writer on this period. And what he can see is that the understated nature of this monarch, his willingness to be a symbol in America, he was hated in America. He was a villain in the American Revolution. He was a villain in Scotland, but he was actually a very understated man called Farmer George. And George and his wife Charlotte were actually known as kind of scholars. They were very intelligent. They were botanists. They were involved in kind of Kew Gardens and the scientific revolution that's represented by Greenwich. And what I didn't know till recently was that she was black. Now, on Wikipedia it says it's a myth that she was black. It's certainly not. And if you look at her portraiture by a man called Alan Ramsey, he's the one portrait painter who doesn't kind of whitewash her features. This is understood. Her race is an issue in kind of common rhymes of the day, and her race is actually used politically in the American Revolution, in our military exploits in America during this period. And what's interesting to me is I know something about just about every queen consort going back to about 800 to Elfrida, the mother of Ethelred. Even if I only know their names or roughly where they're from, I know something about them all. Because I actually find this strand a really useful way to get to grips with British history, and I did not know that she was black. And at this point in our history, this is actually the point where the British press were born. It might actually be worth, at this point, looking at the way that she was recorded, at the way that her ethnicity was kind of recorded in history, and looking at this woman's legacy to look at how far we have come, and to actually look at how outdated this political press kind of vitriol at Meghan Markle, which is actually just another demonstration of intersectionality in the way that racism reproduces across systems at all levels. This might be an opportunity to re-examine Queen Charlotte actually during this period while the monarchy evolves. Now, the monarchy is stable, and what I've found reassuringly as I've done this series is that UK is a very stable country. I've looked at the death of the Labour Party and a crisis in a mediating class that actually democracy took care of, and shown that this is actually a sign of stability. We've looked at the different components of the UK, our geographical makeup, and actually we will survive this process. I've looked at the economics we were using and where it was rooted, and found that actually economics is about the context changing around belief systems and being able to adapt to that. And while our economics is dead, the country has adapted pretty well. Our decision to leave the European Union, it's not especially the decision itself that's the problem, it's the political dysfunction on display. Our application to join the comprehensive progressive Pacific Trade Partnership is actually a way to redefine our place in the world, in a position where we are a bit shy of accepting that we, of all countries, cannot use the Eurasian step to actually kind of address a world where economic power has shifted east because of our exploits in the Middle East. This may be a way to redefine our position in the world and also redefine our relationship with Europe. At each stage in this process, the dysfunction, instability that's being generated and portrayed out to the world, that means that we are at the top of risk reports globally for every company and every country, it's actually very, very, very localized, and it's in a Westminster media culture who cannot reproduce their models. But this video is in fact an example of how this country is just bypassing it quite normally. We can all publish from our living rooms. We are no longer reliant on this obsolete culture who are spinning out demonstrating dysfunction on Twitter. Now, somebody's asked me to do a series looking at what neoliberalism was, and I'm actually going to do that through the lens of an autopsy of the Labour Party and different institutions within it. But I'm not going to do it for a couple of weeks. So for my next couple of videos, next week and the week after, I'm going to do a book review of a book called Capital in the 21st Century by Thomas Piketty, which received a massive reception and not a lot of people read. And I'm going to talk about what that book said, why it received the reception it did, the academic context that produced it, and where we are now in a few years since it actually was released. And I was actually taught by Piketty at the LSE, so kind of that'll be quite interesting to revisit that. And I'm also going to do a video about fashion and about couture and about a Chinese couturier called Guo Pei, who is she is changing the nature of fashion. And I'm going to talk about couture. I'm going to talk about Louis Vuitton in Paris and their hiring of a man called Virgil Abloh. And I'm going to talk about the way that the fashion industry has actually reflected a change that we are actually kind of resisting, accepting, where world power has shifted east. And I'm actually going to do a profile of these designers and look at kind of their work and what it tells us about the world that we are in. I will be back on Sunday with a look at the territories that we call modern day Turkey and the territories that we call Greece around the Aegean. And I'm going to talk about the period after the Bronze Age collapse and civilizations like the Hittites and the Minoans and the Mycenaeans. And I'm actually going to show you how the trade routes and maritime routes that laid the foundation for the European economy actually come into being here. So that's on Sunday. I look forward to doing that. I really enjoyed doing that video on the Nubia. I really, 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 really enjoyed that. I am still using Patreon to talk to people. I'll put my Patreon underneath, and I'm still crowdfunding for kind of equipment and materials to kind of improve the quality of these videos, but they can't undo my technical ineptitude, so I'm very, very sorry about the delay in putting this one out. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for staying with me. Bye bye.